Well, we are political animals. We need to be with people. People are still more lonely now. And first of all, the answer is no, we are not able to be as creative online. For organizations to arrange for people to come into the office and then use that time for socializing, building connections, and then also for complex collaboration is just so important.
Harriet, thank you so much for joining us today. It would be great to start today's conversation with a little bit about your background.
Annabelle, it's so great to be here today. And sure, I'm an advisor and speaker on the future of work and a responsible business advocate. I'm also the managing director of HSM Advisory.
Can companies with a high share of remote work outperform those with a higher share of in-person work?
That's such an interesting question that's at the foremost of so many leaders' minds right now. And I wonder whether it's interesting actually to zoom out a bit and ask, do we know what high performance really is? Can we measure it? Can we describe what that looks like in organizations? And I'd say probably for the majority of organizations, they can't right now. But that's always been true. Pre-COVID, we couldn't either. And of course, the motivation for us having this debate right now is because at COVID, vast numbers of office workers got sent home and then leaders thought, how can I tell if they're productive or not? But there are some things that we do know. So we do know that there are 4 levers of productivity, 2 at the level of the individual, so that's focus and energy, and 2 at the level of the team, so coordination, the more operational side of teamwork, and complex collaboration, that more creative side. And when you start to think about that, I focus personally better at home, but I get more energy when I'm spending some time with my teammates. So you can start to see different combinations of the office and home can create high performance within an organization. But I don't think we can conclusively answer what exactly does that look like yet.
If not managed at all or managed poorly, what are some risks associated with a hybrid work setting?
I think what's so interesting about hybrid working is it's of course more complex than one end of the spectrum, which is fully in the office, or the other end of the spectrum, which is fully at home. And it's in the middle. So people were taken by surprise by this because often the middle of the spectrum is less complex. And so really organizations need to think quite carefully about this. When done well, there are so many opportunities for high performance, a sense of belonging, great collaboration across the organization, combating loneliness. There's a whole range of things. But when managed poorly, we're also seeing risks around a free-for-all for people who are at home, who aren't coming in, they aren't getting all of those benefits. Or, and I'd argue this is probably almost more detrimental, is forcing people into the office and then losing that sense of engagement or that sense of autonomy. So really what we're looking for is that balance in a well-managed hybrid working program.
What are some companies that are implementing these policies successfully?
Yeah, of course. And I think there's some really fascinating studies coming out. We're finally being able to make some data-driven decisions around this. I suppose what's one area that people have been interested in? Well, creativity has been really front and foremost. Are we still able to be creative online? Does a brainstorm work online? And actually there's some really interesting data coming out of Columbia Business School, which was studying, can we do that? And what they did is they studied one-to-one brainstorming sessions to see how creative people were. And first of all, the answer is no, we are not able to be as creative online. But why was it? And the answer really interested me. It's because people stare so intently at the person in front of them to trying to show them that they're listening, that their eyes don't move around. And actually, it's when our eyes move around that we're able to access the part of our brain that connects disparate bits of information. So I think there's some studies like that coming out that are starting to really show us what we can and can't do in organizations and how to play our hybrid working policies.
Building long-term resilience in organizations is crucial, but what does resilience mean in this context, and how can companies increase that resilience over time and improve employee engagement?
And resilience is such an important topic, isn't it? I mean, if we think about the sort of major black swan events that we've had over the past few years, things that we could not have imagined was going to happen, all of office workers being sent home to work from home, the financial crisis before that, these are things that we just didn't think were going to happen. So resilience is really important within that context. And I think the role of the office has quite a significant place to play in that. My belief is that it's true for the majority of people at the majority of organizations that having some time in the office will build out their resilience. Why is that? Well, we are political animals. We need to be with people. We need communities. Even people who naturally perhaps would identify as being quite introverted and want to spend time at home, actually during COVID found that quite challenging. So we need to spend that time in the office. It's not just for community and collaboration, community and socializing though. It's actually also about collaboration. So we've already mentioned how important complex collaboration happening face-to-face is. And for organizations to arrange for people to come into the office and then use that time for socializing, building connections, and then also for complex collaboration is just so important.
What strategies can leaders implement to help increase and maintain this resilience?
I really think it's quite specific to the organization. So I don't think there's one size fits all for organizations. My perspective is an organization should have a really clear view of their North Star. They should understand the strategy they're taking to get there. And then, of course, their ways of working to support that. For instance, the legal sector. For a long time, they wanted to be more innovative. The organizations I spoke with wanted to engender more innovative practices, but they were still working pre-COVID in a highly regimented, very strict in the office, long hours style. And so I think what organizations have the opportunity to do now is create ways of working that engender the behaviors and mindset that they need to achieve that North Star. And so leaders need to be thinking really carefully about what that means for them.
Loneliness is a growing concern, especially with hybrid and remote work becoming so prevalent. So what can companies do to mitigate this loneliness?
There's some really fascinating data coming out about loneliness. And so loneliness peaked during COVID, unsurprisingly, but we're not back to the levels that we were prior to COVID. People are still more lonely now. There are the older generations, or our eldest generation, are quite lonely, which didn't surprise me, sadly, but didn't surprise me. But actually, people are most lonely in the UK when they're 25 years old, and particularly that category of 18 to 25-year-olds. And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's an age when people probably still have quite a wide social network. They are likely to be in work somewhere with a community there. So for me, that shows the importance of doubling down on creating a sense of community and of leaders really building that into how people have a sense of belonging at work.
On that note, have you seen any companies build out strategies to help mitigate this loneliness?
I've seen organizations thinking quite carefully about it. So I don't know if you've come across any of the organizations that are creating neighborhood groups. So you come into the office and you sit in a neighborhood, and you might get cycled through different neighborhoods in order to both socialize with different teams that are nearby, but also, and I'll keep on coming back to this, but do that complex collaboration with teams that are close by. I think initially we saw a huge amount around socials, and I'm not knocking it. Socials are really important. However, I think the sense of connection needs to be that and something more meaningful, more substantive. So really around work and how it is that people are in a community of people working together face to face.
Looking ahead, how do you see the role of the office evolving in regards to resilience, performance, and community building?
What I hope to see looking ahead is organizations thinking really strategically about this. So perhaps starting to marry up different parts of the business to think about it. So maybe a head of culture working with the head of their office space, perhaps thinking about their tech team getting involved in that as well. So really good cross-organization thinking to make the role of the office one that's working for the whole organization. Now, what that means organization to organization will change. For the majority of people at the majority of organizations, they should be spending some time in the office. That won't be true for everyone or for every organization. For high performance within the majority, that's absolutely what you need to see. And this is around building resilience. It's around stopping that sense of loneliness, and it's around enabling that complex collaboration. So this is what I hope to see, and let's see what happens over the coming years.
What advice would you give to organizations looking to adapt their office for the future of work and to balance this want for flexibility with the benefits of in-office collaboration?
I think we're seeing such a range of office use at the moment. So some of the organizations I walk into are pretty traditional still. They're probably hot desking, but we've got banks and banks of desks. Others have collaborative spaces and then the hot desking, and then an unbelievable organization, which I went to perhaps a couple of years ago, where their office floor is basically an events company that can be reconfigured in a modular way at a week's notice. And I think organizations need to figure out where do they sit on that span, but certainly let's move away from banks and banks of desks. Let's have creative spaces. If the space itself doesn't encourage the behavior and the mindset that you're looking for, then that space isn't working for you. So to think really in detail around what that means for an organization or your organization specifically.
What are some innovations you're seeing in terms of the utilization of office space?
I think there are quite a lot of things going on at the moment for organizations, and I'm hoping that organizations will continue to experiment. That's going to be so important. Two things that stand to mind are, first of all, actually what do leaders do when they come into the office? So all too often what we find is leaders come in, they're in back-to-back meetings all day. If they still have an office, their door is shut, but if they don't, it's metaphorically shut. People are concerned about coming to talk to them. So I think it's going to be really important for leaders to think about having a bit of time that's a bit serendipitous, let's say. I was going to say free time, but it's actually not free time. It's time to walk the floors, to talk to people, to be open and welcoming to speaking with people. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is this role of the pilot floor that actually isn't a new thing. I first saw it about 6 years ago in Australia, where they're really quite far ahead in terms of their thinking about the use of office space. But this pilot floor, when a new office block is built or an organization is shifting around how they're using their space, they cycle their different teams through the pilot floor. They might get, say, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks on the pilot floor. So when they move into their new space or their reconfigured space, they're ready to go. They understand how to use it. And there isn't that full start right at the beginning. So I think those are a couple of things that are really coming to mind.
Harriet, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all of your wonderful insights. Do you have any final advice for our listeners about maximizing their office?
Annabelle, it's been so great speaking with you today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I suppose the thing that I'd want to leave people with is really doubling down on figuring out what your North Star is, what's your strategy to get there, and then making sure that your hybrid working policy and use of space supports that, supports the behaviors and the mindsets that you're hoping to create to arrive at that North Star.
That's really wonderful. Thanks again for joining us. We loved hearing your perspective.
Thanks so much for having me, Annabelle.